And I'm convinced that there were people, many people there in Jonestown that were happy to be there. I look back on my experience in the FLDS, and before I ended up leaving, I didn't have all of these desires to be saved. I didn't want someone to come in and try to take me out of it, because I actually thought that it was the best life for me. That's what I was told my entire life. And I was, so I thought, very happy to be there. I felt like I had a great life. Everything was perfect. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I was born and raised in the FLDS community. It is a polygamous group run by Warren Jeffs, and I moved out when I was 18 years old.
I was raised LDS. Sam and I have been married for 9 years and have two awesome kiddos.
Yes, we do. We want to quickly thank our donors, YouTube members, and our patrons over on Patreon. We really do appreciate your support.
Yes, and for those of you who are members of our YouTube channel or Patreon, we wanted to remind you that next week, starting on June 24th, that Monday, we are going to be opening up my birthday cruise to all the members first for that first week, and then all the rest of our awesome YouTube family on July 1st. We are so excited. It's on the Royal Caribbean Harmony of the Seas, which is the fourth largest ship in the world. It's basically a floating city. We love cruising, and we thought it would be even more fun to go with some of you. So there is limited availability, but you'll be able to go check that out. All the details on our website. Again, for everybody, it's going to be available July 1st.
Today's video is going to be covering a new documentary on Hulu called The Cult Massacre.
It's all about Jonestown and Jim Jones. And we have had other videos and things that we've talked about, the closeness and things that we're seeing that are happening within the FLDS right now, and the things that Warren Jeffs are saying in his most recent revelations, and how we're really worried about another Jonestown.
Yeah, when we saw this pop up as a documentary, wow, we just thought, unfortunately, we have to see this, right? I mean, it's one of those things that's been talked about for years and decades at this point, of this awful thing that happened in Jonestown. And so to be able to see firsthand, or at least see people that were involved in it very, very closely talk about their experiences and what they went through, is fascinating. We've only seen the first episode. We're going to be covering that today. So we kind of know where it leads up to and what happens, like most people do. But man, it's just so sad to see some of these people and to see how similar it is to other groups that we're familiar with.
Yeah, I would say that one of the main things that's happening right now within the FLDS is these new revelations from Warren Jeffs that's talking about the fact that all of the people are going to need to be translated when the world ends in a couple of years. But then he says, in order to be translated, at first you must die. And so that's a big scare for a lot of people, especially those that still have family within the FLDS and those who have children within the FLDS still. It's a major concern. And so we thought if we can kind of shed a little bit of light on some of the similarities of these groups and hopefully bring awareness to this, hopefully we can avoid a Jonestown situation within the FLDS community if enough people know about it.
Yeah, it's sad that it has to be talked about again, that we're nervous and fearful that something like that could happen again. It's really sad that we even have to consider that something like Jonestown could happen again, but it's just the similarities that we see within some of these leaders of these groups and colonies, cults, whatever you want to call them, that it's just so much control, so much of this forcing people to live a certain way and twisting it to make it feel like and seem like that the people are making the choices for themselves.
Yeah, if you want to see our past video about the revelations where we go into specifics about Warren Jeffs' revelations and why those are so scary, I will leave the link above. But today we kind of wanted to go through this documentary and share some of the main similarities leading up to an event like this and how it can happen. And I'd say one of the main things that this whole documentary was trying to get the point across, and it was actually Jim Jones' son who said it, and Sam looked at me like, yeah, that's how it works. He said, so often when you focus on the massacre itself, people will look at the people of Jonestown and think, those people must have been stupid. How could they get themselves into something like that? And how could they not see the warning signs? And how would they be willing to do that? Yeah. And that's something we talk about a lot on this channel, is that the people going into it, it's because the leader is charismatic, because he is promising things, playing off of other belief systems. And that's what Jim Jones' son was talking about. He's like, a lot of times people forget to mention how good my father was at being a leader.
Well, and not only a leader to a certain type of person, he was very diverse. The group that followed him was a very diverse crowd, people from all different walks of lives and different beliefs, because he would play on their emotions based on current events that were happening in the 1970s. And there were a lot of movements going on during that time, a lot of really upset people about certain things. And he would just take that and try to connect with them and make them feel that they were welcome no matter what their circumstance or belief was. So I can see why so many people would fall for that. And very few people were lucky enough, I guess you could say, to see any of the signs that were leading up to who he became and what he did.
Yeah, and I would say that, too, at the beginning, it started off, as Jim Jones said himself, as a Judeo-Christian church. And they talked about how he emphasized service, that they served a lot of people. And they were holding on to those Christian values, right? So once again, another person that is taking Christian values and then beginning to twist them. But when people are first going to that church, they're feeling a sense of community.
Yeah.
They're feeling a sense of love. They're feeling a sense of service. And they're being led to Judeo-Christian values, which most of the people already had a background in that belief system, right? Yeah. And so it's very easy when you feel all of those things, especially love and community and service, that you're going to want to follow that, right? And it's that slow twisting that we've talked about so many times, because those are a lot of the same things that the FLDS were founded upon as well.
Yeah, yes. From the FLDS perspective, and now we know, and the news is covering all sorts of things that happened within the FLDS, things Warren Jeffs did, just like here with Jim Jones and what he did. But when you're a part of it, or before you believe what the news is saying, or even hear what the news is saying about these groups, you don't really look at all of the signs as these red flags, because they're using so much familiar material that it's easy to fall into their trap. And then by the time you are possibly noticing something that might be a red flag or a turning red flag, at that point you trust this person. And so it's not just like these people are from the outside looking at this crazy group that they have no connection with or no similar beliefs to. They're really feeling like this guy, Jim Jones, is leading them to a better and happier place.
Yeah, and one of the ways that he did that was to say, you know what, we're going to create a utopia. We are going to go to South America, into the jungle, and we are going to create this place where there is no rent and we all take care of each other. And this is a concept that, is not new to these type of closed societies or cults. It's not new to the FLDS. Even within Mormonism, the idea of the law of consecration is what it's often referred to within Mormonism. The law of consecration, meaning that everybody brings together what they have, their time, their talent, resources, everything, and then they take care of the needs of the community. And it's a beautiful idea. And early on within Mormonism, in Joseph Smith's days, it failed. And the mainstream LDS church has not tried that since, though they have a good welfare system. But the law of consecration is not something within the mainstream LDS church. And then with the FLDS, they have tried that, and they did try it. And it's gotten more and more strict to where it was even a smaller, I don't want to say more consecrated, to where nobody was allowed to own anything on their own.
Yeah, I think the law of consecration is still very much throughout all Mormonism beliefs. It's just the meaning of law of consecration has changed. I've heard people talk about it. I've heard it talked about in different ways, but not in the same sense that you give everything that you own and put it into this pot and then it's dispersed. That definitely does not happen anymore. But the idea of I consecrate my life and everything that I am to the building up of God, the kingdom of God on earth, and if God asks it of me, I will freely give. That idea exists.
Yes, sorry, the belief system does, but the actual system of the consecration itself.
Right. So I think that the meaning of it has just changed in some different groups. once again, everyone can take one passage of scripture or one definition and change it depending on what works in that time for that group. It happens. I mean, look at Christianity, right? How many different beliefs are there within Christianity? There was only one Jesus Christ, but there's a lot of different beliefs in what that means for us, and depending on where you live, your culture, it can be a little different, or in some cases, very different.
Yeah. So as he builds this, what is being called a utopia, this idea of everyone going and being able to live together communally in South America, we kind of see the same things of at first it's this idea of like, we're going to escape from the world, which is kind of how the FLDS started too. They're like, well, we want to avoid persecution, so we're going to go so that we're not bothered. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes almost this sense of fear of people are going to come into our community, right? Like at first it's just, okay, we're going to go over here so that we're left alone. And then it becomes this paranoia. And the paranoia reminded me a lot of Warren Jeffs, the same way that Jim Jones was like, they're coming after me. They're going to hurt us. They're going to do this. And the FLDS had history behind them as well, that the government would come after them. The people would come and try to destroy them.
Right. And the tricky thing here to keep in mind is Jim Jones and Warren Jeffs and many that have come before and after them have said words that would convince their followers, like, we know that the government is after us because we're doing God's will. And of course, these bad government people over here are going to try to fight that because they're working for Satan or something. They use those kinds of words because they know they have a conscience and they know that what they're doing is not legal. It's not good for society, for these people that they're involved with. And so they know that eventually the government will come after them. So what better way to convince your followers than to just say from the beginning, you know what? The government's going to come after us. It's going to happen one of these days, and that's when we'll know that it is time for God's people to rise up, to really prepare themselves for what's coming because time is short. The world's coming to an end. It's interesting to me how similar the words are that each of these people use and the idea of how they go about trying to force or convince their followers that what they're doing is good.
Yeah, it was interesting to me, though, that, Jim Jones went all the way to South America.
Right.
Into the jungle.
He tried to escape.
So, and so I was kind of surprised to hear that luckily family members that were still in the States were able to convince a congressman to take action and go see what was going on. Like, hey, people want to leave. They're being held against their will. Because in my mind, I thought, man, I don't know, like, maybe congressmen would still do that right now. Maybe. I don't know what the breadth of what they would be willing to do is, but the idea of somebody like being on a different continent,
right,
and going and trying to save these people who are wanting to leave, that are being abused, what the community turned into is, as they were starting to describe, as a work camp, right? Which is a lot of FLDS people were saying the same thing, kids.
That the places, the compounds in Texas and other places were like work camps in a way.
Yeah, working 20 hours a day, no sleep, no money for all of their work. It's just going to building up the kingdom of God, right? So it ends up in labor. And I'm very curious, and I don't know if they're going to talk about this or not, because I know that the whole point of the show is to kind of focus on the massacre itself. But I'm very curious what monetary gains Jim Jones had. From all of this work, because more than just taking care of everyone, I guarantee there was money behind it, because there's always money.
There's always money, and there's always wanting power. And if you're a person like that, a narcissist, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah,
pretty safe to say that. If you're a narcissist, then it's all about you. And they even mentioned that for Jim, he wanted all the attention on him always. So he just wanted that power. And yes, I'm sure there's money involved, especially if there's free labor that you're forcing your followers to do and things. But same with Warren Jeffs. Of course, there was money involved. But it was also the sense of being able to control so many people and convince so many people. I feel like there's just people out there in this world, unfortunately, that want that. They have to have that power, And so ultimately, when people start to I guess we'll get into this a little bit more, but when people start to disagree with you, or if people start to say they want to leave or have a different idea on life, then it's like a personal attack on that person. Like, how dare you do this to me? And so they get really hurt by that. And that's why they go to these extremes, whether it's to end someone's life or do something extreme to convince them to stay there.
Yeah. So ultimately, a bunch of reporters, congressmen, family members of people that were still in the community all flew down to South America, and they were met with a lot of resistance at first. And then they were greeted with wide open arms and given beautiful tours of their community and, people applauding and smiling about what a wonderful place it was and everything was great until they started receiving these notes. And again, that reminded me a lot of the FLDS, that most of the time, if a reporter was to go out, not that they would get talked to anyway,
right,
but it's mostly going to be about how we're not victims in this. We're choosing this. We love this lifestyle. This is where we want to be. There's nothing wrong with how we're living. All of those type of things on the surface. And then every once in a while, you would have the occasional someone trying to leave, or people asking for help from law enforcement, or running away in the middle of the night. Those type of things that were kind of the FLDS notes to people, like, hey, no, there's something going on here more than what you're seeing when you're just looking at it for face value.
Yeah, and I'm convinced that there were people, many people there in Jonestown, that were happy to be there. I look back on my experience in the FLDS, and before I ended up leaving, I didn't have all of these desires to be saved. I didn't want someone to come in and try to take me out of it, because I actually thought that it was the best life for me. That's what I was told my entire life. And I was, so I thought, very happy to be there. I felt like I had a great life. Everything was perfect. I had no idea that there were young teenage girls that were dealing with misery and going through hell, basically, that were sitting on a few rows down from me, listening to the same sermons I was listening to. I had no idea other things like that were going on. And those would have been the people, like in Jonestown, that would be passing these letters to say, hey, help, I want out. But because I wasn't familiar with that, and my experience was so different and so much more positive than other people's experiences, I assumed there were plenty of people in Jonestown that were very happy to be there.
Well, and they said that there was about 1,000 people who were there. And as more and more people started coming out and saying that they did want to leave, and as it became like they actually had a possibility of leaving with the congressman, they said they had about 15 people, and the number was growing and growing, and to where they had to get a second plane. And it's becoming more and more tense as more and more people are wanting to leave. But still, like you said, out of 1,000 people, 15 people are willing to say at this time that they're ready to leave. Then there's those people who probably were happy. And then there's probably the group of people who are too scared to say that they wanted to leave as well, right?
Yeah, and there's also going to be those people that want to leave, but they want to see how it goes for these people first. That happens, right? Okay, let's let these 14 people, 15 people go. And then let's just see what happens next. No one had any idea what Jim Jones was actually going to do. So they felt like it would be okay to kind of hang back, see how things go. And if it goes well for those that are leaving, then they can give it a try later and possibly leave as well.
And ultimately, this episode ended on the fact that while the congressman is trying to get these 15 people out, and they are having to order another plane, and the congressman says, I'll stay behind and get the second group of people. And an attack on his life, someone had pulled a knife, and luckily he was safe and someone else was able to get him out of that situation. But it's showing that there's now this desperateness almost, right? Like there's this, okay, now they're really not happy that you're taking people. And there was one person where, one parent wanted to leave and wanted to take a child, and the mom was wanting the child to stay. And you're watching kind of like separation of families. It can be separation of loved ones or even just community members. And things are getting really tense and heated and now starting to turn violent. And this is still always before anything
And
else.
many people mentioned that they saw the turning of Jim Jones. That he was actually getting angry physically. You could tell that he was getting so upset as they were interviewing him and asking him questions that he didn't feel that he needed to answer. Right? He felt like he was this king of the world, and they needed to leave him alone and stop asking him questions because he's doing everything right in his mind.
Yeah, and him hanging around people that were being questioned that wanted to leave and kind of just lingering around and just intimidation, right?
Yeah, so he was getting very, very angry. So this violence that happened, I assume that Jim Jones just started turning violent in that moment. And maybe he already had those tendencies before, but now he's physically willing to try to, I assume he would have asked this person to kill the congressman.
Who
But
knows,
who
right?
knows? Or maybe enough negativity was talked about the congressman that this person felt that he needed to do it regardless of whether or not Jim Jones wanted him to. Because sometimes if you speak negatively enough about the outside world, about the government, then your followers can get very violent as well. So once again, those words that people use can be very, very powerful.
Yeah, well, and they said that Jim Jones in his sermons within the U.S. that he would invite politicians to come and speak to his congregations, and then as soon as the politicians would leave, he'd use it as an example as to why the world's so wicked and why politicians are the worst, right? So
Yeah.
he had a long history of hating on politicians and trying to say why they were evil and corrupt and all that. So it's not a surprise that he didn't get along swimmingly with the congressman while he was
Right.
there trying to help protect people and take them away out of that situation.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know. Like you said a while back, I don't know what his ultimate purpose was. Rather than the only thing I can see from the outside, at least to this point, we still have 2 more episodes to go, is that he wanted power and control, and he wanted, I assume there was money involved in some way or another. So, but other than that, I mean, sure, there probably are plenty of politicians out there that are doing bad things and that people would complain about and hate for doing certain things, but he, to invite them into his congregation just to try to prove a point some way or another, I don't know if he had a specific reason for hating the government,
Yeah.
or
they
if it
don't
was
like
just
to-
his way to try to get more of his followers to be on his side.
Yeah. And with the political climate there in the 70s, because they mentioned that a lot in this episode, maybe he was just trying to get more followers to really trust him and to.
Yeah.
I feel like having a common enemy can really strengthen a community or group, honestly. Sometimes hating something is almost as strong as loving something else, right? Like there are certain groups where just focusing on the negative, right? The hate for the government or hate for another political group or party, like that hatred can be just as strong as love can be,
You can. Yeah, those
unfortunately.
are 2 of the most powerful emotions for sure that you can have as a human, at least I think. And
Yeah.
it's either, and they're very extreme emotions too. That's another part of it that makes it so tricky, is that hate is such an extreme emotion, but love is just as extreme. So the only way to counteract the hate is by love, or vice versa. Counteract love is by hate, because they're just so powerful. And yes, in all of these groups, they use those 2 emotions very, very strongly to convince people to do things for them.
Yeah. So we will be back more with the next 2 episodes going through. I was surprised how quickly, even in the first episode, we're leading up to only a couple hours before the massacre happens. So it will be definitely happening in the second. But just wanted to give some comparisons leading into this. And again, just going back to the beginning of reminding people why people are able to get sucked into these cults or these groups and these following. It's not because the people are stupid. It's because they're master manipulators who are able to feed off of people's emotions, feed off their religious beliefs, off of their spirituality, off of common goals and love and community. And that's really how people end up into these groups
Right.
with such a controlling leader.
And most of these groups don't start out as extreme as they become. That's something
That's true,
to
too.
remember too. I mean, there's plenty of groups out there. Think of groups that you are a part of, because there's no wrong in these groups at these times. You know, there's humans, I feel like we like to be involved with other people. We like to have a common ground, a common understanding, and people to communicate with and talk with. That's why there's so many things like book clubs and different clubs out there where people can get together and talk about similar things. And I'm not saying book clubs are bad by any means. I'm just saying that something as simple as a book club could start out as simple as a book club and turn into something else. And it just can be a very, very gradual direction from, it just takes one bad person.
Yeah, who wants power and control.
And is one bad person that is good at convincing others, because that is another big part of it too, is people that know how to use emotions against other people. Those are the ones that can convince people to do anything they want.
Yeah. If you want to hear more what it was like for Sam growing up in polygamy, then please like and subscribe.
Yes. Thank you all so much for being here with us, and we look forward to talking with you soon.
I'll talk to you soon.